Let's talk a little bit about democracy, Andy. I mean, I started the show kind of giving you a little bit of a commendation, not a condemnation. Giving you some praise. I know you're not in it for the praise, but you've really been doing some hard and tiring work, sitting in these committee rooms in the General Assembly, testifying on some, submitting written testimony on others, and talking to lawmakers and advocates. So tell us a little bit about your day in Annapolis, working to improve our democracy.
So let's start with, so yesterday I was in Annapolis all day long, 8 a.m. to 8 p.m., long day, and we'll get there in a second. But I want to talk about what we were doing Tuesday night as well. And so I went on LBS's From the Streets to the State House live stream on Tuesday night and had a great conversation with my friend and longtime collaborator, Davon Love, of Leaders of a Beautiful Struggle, about the way that our campaign sees the possibility of multi-party democracy situating within a tradition of Black political power, Black revolutionary movements, and Black grassroots organizing. And it's a really good conversation. I encourage folks to go check it out. We got into some of the details and some of the history that I think oftentimes doesn't happen in these conversations. And I think it's worth understanding a history in which the United States has largely always been a multi-party democracy, and we have been a country where, at the state level and at the national level, there have often been strategic and revolutionary challenges to the two-party system in order to realign the way that things work right now, and it's easy to forget that because we are so used to thinking that there's a two-party system. I had a conversation last year. One of the stories that I tell on this podcast is that I had a conversation last year with Senator Sidnor at an event in Baltimore City at the Reginald Lewis Museum, in which he said, we don't have a two-party system and you need to stop saying that. And he said, we have a multi-party system. Greens are on the ballot. You're here. You're running for office. And I think that reframing is super important to what happened on Wednesday. Because I used to say we need to break down the two-party system and build a multi-party system. We have a multi-party system. In the state of Maryland, by law, there are multiple parties. There's principal parties, which are the Democrats and the Republicans, and there's a whole other class of parties, which is non-principal parties like the Green Party. It exists. It's a multi-party system. The problem is that system prioritizes only two parties as able to be healthy, only two parties is able to receive state resources, and only two parties as likely to elect people to power. So the day we had in Annapolis was there to go expand, to go talk about the ways that we can make a healthy multi-party system, that we can get more people voting, and that we can address some of the policy problems that exist right now in the way that elections are run and the way that democracy is run, and talk about real things that would make real significant contributions to allowing us to have a healthier multi-party system where more voters felt like their voices were heard and where politicians were responsive to the needs of people and communities who are often left out. So it was a big day. We'll get into the bills in a second. One other thing I want to say there is I had an awesome opportunity. First real time that I've got to do this in this campaign. I had an awesome opportunity to film a bit of a segment for Common Cause, who is a national advocacy organization and somebody that we have worked with here in Maryland. They are doing a presentation on a film on publicly financed candidates. We're the only publicly financed candidates at the state level here in Maryland. And so I got to go and, have guys with nice cameras and lights and mics setting me up, doing real shots. We walked through Annapolis doing some B-roll. I can't wait for folks to see it. I'm used to being on camera like this, where we are on a webcam talking in a little box into Zoom. And it was real nice to have lights and mics and guys with nice cameras who know how to use them. And I can't wait for folks to be able to see that. So that all happened. It was awesome. That led up to what was a 7-hour marathon set of hearings yesterday in Annapolis on a bunch of different bills. And so we can get into those now, I guess, if you want.
Yeah, no, I think it's just important to recognize that both of those experiences are the result of long haul organizing, of showing up, and we have some rules about what we can and can't do as candidates, but we're also organizers and advocates, and we have these deep relationships based on solidarity and reciprocity, and it's nice to see when they come together kind of around policy advocacy, and showing what's possible through reforms like public campaign financing.
Yeah.
So tell us about what happened in the room. Your Glee is your new home away from home, right? So what was going on in the committee?
Yeah, so Government, Labor, and Elections Committee handles election bills on Wednesdays typically. And so that is where I'm hanging out on Wednesdays. I'm trading a day away from building the business. I'm giving it back on Saturday and Sunday so that I can spend the day in that committee every Wednesday, because that is the place where I believe the reforms we need to make a healthy multi-party system and a healthy democracy in Maryland are going to come from. That's an awesome committee with some amazing people on it. And I believe if we work there this year and next year, we can find bills that are aligned with our platform, we can figure out how to support them, and we can build the kind of coalitions that are necessary to create a realignment and get real things done. So there were a couple bills yesterday that we offered written testimony on and didn't give oral testimony for. And the first one of those is HB 52. Which is the Voting Rights for All Act. And this is a right that was sponsored by Delegate Janelle Wilkins. It restores voting rights for incarcerated Marylanders. And that means that people who are currently incarcerated under this bill would be able to vote and would have their voting rights. And it also creates a voting hotline for prisoners to be able to call and ask questions and understand the process, their rights, the way that things work. Now, for us, as Green Party members, we have long included incarcerated people and membership of our party. One of the benefits of not having state-run primaries is that we can include young people, people with immigration statuses that don't allow them to vote, and incarcerated people. And we have done that for years and years and years because we believe that those folks are on the wrong side of policy and should have the ability to weigh in on that policy and have the ability to vote. We think that the sentence for a crime should not be losing your voting rights. The sentence for a crime should it should be whatever it is. We can talk about sentencing reform and all of that, but if in a world where we live in right now, if somebody is getting sentenced for a crime, we don't think that should include having to lose their voting rights, especially if they're forced or if they're able to work inside and are paying taxes on those low wage income that they make. That's taxation without representation. But beyond that, we think that folks who are incarcerated should have the ability to vote, and because incarceration is political, and every person who is in a Maryland prison is there because of policy choices the people who are elected have made, and the people living under those policies should have a say in what those policies look like. To us, this is not a complicated idea, and it has been a core of the Green Party organizing tenets for a long time. But we are really excited to see Delegate Wilkins bring this bill forward for another year. We'd like to see Maryland be like Maine and Vermont and DC and extend the franchise to folks. It was really good a couple of years ago in 2016, not a couple of years ago at this point, 8 years ago at this point, when it was extended to folks who were ending their term of incarceration. But we think that it should be extended to folks who are still locked up and still on the inside. And this is a key element of democracy, not just for us, but for the people and for the voters for the people who are experiencing incarceration, and for the other voters who, have those folks ripped out of their community and lose the voting power that those folks have.
Yeah, it's a really interesting initiative. And does it address the piece of the injustice in which the folks who are incarcerated count for the populations of the place where they're incarcerated, not the place where, they called home beforehand?
Yeah, I
Like,
believe that is already corrected in Maryland, but this bill specifically says that the places that they were living prior to being locked up are the places where they're able to vote.
okay, so it would keep their registration where they were before. That's good.
Yeah. It does not mean that they now vote in Cumberland if they're being sent to Cumberland or Hagerstown or the Eastern Shore. I believe, I'm 90% sure that's the case. We will double check and give an update on that. But I believe that it keeps folks in the place where they were registered when they were incarcerated and allows them to vote there.
Yeah. That's important.
So this is a good bill, and this is a good bill brought by Democrats. And one of the things that I think is important about the work in this committee is that we, as Greens, can support things that are brought by Democrats or Republicans. It's not that we are outside of the political system. And if I were governor, I would make this a priority that we signed right away, and I'd work with whatever Democrats and Republicans we need to do to work with in order to get this done.
Right. Yeah, and another way to think about it is over time, Democrats have come towards green positions on a number of issues, whether it's briefly the Green New Deal or voting rights and so forth. So there's collaboration, and often Greens, because we aren't funded by corporations and the wealthy, we're able to put forward values-based solutions, and eventually progressive Democrats or other folks in power take up some of those good ideas. And we're not.
And look, we don't have elected representatives. We don't have people in power right now. So a lot of credit here goes to Delegate Wilkins for bringing forward this piece of legislation, because we may have a good idea about it, but she's in the position of power and has to deal with the consequences of bringing it forward. There's probably a lot of people who might not like this bill and might think that it is, trying to get votes from murderers or something, as one of the Republicans said the other day, and so it takes courage to bring forward a bill like this. And we appreciate that courage, and we appreciate the people in power who are able to advance the good ideas. I think it's important also here to understand that there is not a hard line between us and the Democrats. It's not like the Democrats end here and we start here and there's no in between. There's a lot of overlap, and there's overlap with Republicans on some things too. So, this is as we think about what a multi-party system looks like, it is about realigning coalitions and about allowing coalitions to exist in a way that doesn't work right now. This is something that Shane Robinson mentioned when he was on a couple of weeks ago. All the bills we're highlighting today are sponsored by Democrats or sponsored by Republicans. And I just want to be clear that we give them credit for bringing these bills forward, especially courageous things like this that, could have blowback for somebody.
Mm-hmm. Right. I think, there's kind of a contrarian streak in Green Party, and for good reason in the U.S. And when we look at places where at the municipal level in the U.S. where Greens are in office, or around the world, whether it's Germany or the UK or Canada, that Greens collaborate with folks from other parties in order to get things done. And so this is an example of that in a way.
And if I were giving the state of the state, if it's next year and I get to give the state of the state and this bill has not passed yet, I'm going to talk about this in the state of the state, because I think it is important to put the full force and power of the state government and of the governor behind bills like this, and not make folks fight against all of the barriers that are being put up in order to make sure that people have the right to vote. Plain and simple.
Let the people vote. Shouldn't be too controversial, but unfortunately it is in our current political system. So what other bills were you there to give testimony on or following?
Yeah. So HB 499 by Delegate Sheila Ruth is the Ballot Petition Modernization Act. And this is a bill that I've worked on quite a bit over the last couple of years. What it does is it modernizes the ballot petition process that third parties, independent candidates, charter amendments, and referendum get to use. Right now, that process uses a paper form in which people handwrite their name into a badly designed form sign it, and then a board of elections worker has to count it, read it, and match it against a database. Now, for the Green Party to get on the ballot every 10 years or every couple of years, that's 10,000 valid signatures that have to be processed that way by hand. Some poor person has to sit there and read the handwriting and figure out whether it matches. About 30% of these get invalidated through that process. And of that 30% that get invalidated, some of them are illegible. Some of them are voters who, or people who don't exist in the voting database, but a good percentage of them are registered voters who have a constitutional right to sign a petition like this and are having their names thrown out and having the expression of their voting rights thrown out because some poor election worker who's forced to read through 10,000 of these in 2 weeks can't find them in the database. What the bill does is 3 separate things. One, it builds on success that we had coming out of the 2020 COVID state of emergency, where the State Board of Elections, myself and Jared Demarinis, who's the director of the State Board of Elections, worked together to get electronic signatures allowed on petitions during the COVID state of emergency. Director Demarinis, or State Board of the Elections Administrator Demarinis, has said in public that this was a program that worked. We think it worked for third parties. We think it worked for election workers, but most importantly, we think it worked for voters, because voters were able to sign wherever they wanted to. They didn't have to print something out. They could look into the party instead of signing it. Usually these things get signed at farmers markets or fairs or festivals or subway stops. And, you'll see somebody out there with a clipboard. You're at the farmer's market, you got a bag of groceries, a coffee, maybe you're pulling a dog or a kid behind you, and somebody says, "Can I get you to sign this to support grassroots democracy?" You say, of course. You sign it, you scribble your name, and then you walk away. There's a good chance that signature gets invalidated in the current system. This system modernizes it and syncs it up with the rest of our government, where you can use a website, fill it out, and use an electronic signature. It also has a provision that allows for name standards to be made easier, to be made more reasonable. My name is Andy Ellis, at least that's what I go by, but my government name is Stephen Andrew Ellis. And if I wrote Andy Ellis on the petition without, like I said, I'm moving quickly, I've got coffee in one hand, a dog and a kid in tow, groceries, I write Andy Ellis, that's going to get invalidated. In states like New Jersey and Massachusetts, where in states like New Jersey and Massachusetts, there is a Democrats and Republicans have to fill out those signatures as well. So in those states, if I wrote Andy Ellis, it would be allowed because that's a reasonable interpretation of my name. And in states where Democrats and Republicans have to use those standards, there's really good reasonableness standards. And we would allow, and this bill would allow that. The third thing that it would do is it would allow signatures that have been rejected to be cured by the sponsor of the bill, by the sponsor of the petition. And what that means is if my Andy Ellis signature got rejected because I wrote Andy Ellis instead of Stephen Andrew Ellis, in the current system, I would never know whether my signature counted or not, right? But under this system, the sponsor of the petition would be able to locate me, say, "Hey, there was a problem with your signature. Can you come down here and fix it?" We allow this to happen with absentee ballots. We allow this to happen with other things. And it's a common sense reform that we should apply to the ballot petition process as well. So this bill, HB 499, is sponsored by Delegate Sheila Ruth. It has been sponsored by it was sponsored by then Senator Joe Carter in the past. And it is a good and easy common sense reform to modernize our system and make it so that people who have to use petitions can do so in a way that works well for voters, works well for those petitioning organizations, and works well for election workers.
Yeah. I always remember when I sign, I'm like, okay, what did I register with? Is it Owen S. Andrews? Is it Owen Silverman Andrews, Owen Andrews? And I have to stress out and go look at my voter registration card and try to match it up. And it's unnecessary burden. And I like that curing aspect of it as well, because who knows, we may have petitioned the same people multiple times who have signed it slightly off each time, and we never know, and it makes it that much harder. So I think
one other thing, that's actually a great point. One other thing this bill does, that's a crime right now. If you sign it twice, it's a crime in the state of Maryland to sign the petition twice. And folks don't know whether they've signed it twice. It's a crime that is never enforced, and it is only on the books. It is on the books from a bygone era, and if it is enforced, it's selectively enforced. So this bill also removes that as a crime, and doesn't prosecute people who accidentally sign something twice at a farmer's market.
That's good. Yes, abolish that crime. I was referring to over multiple years signing, and signing it incorrectly. But yeah, no, that's another great aspect of it. So yeah, thanks to Delegate Ruth on that one. So what else are we looking at here?
All right, HB 568 is public financing for the General Assembly. And so this bill would expand the kind of public financing program that we are in right now at the state level to include state Senate races and state delegate races. And so I testified that we are the only people who are currently using this process right now, and that this process is an essential way to make third-party candidates more viable and to make alternative parties more healthy, because third-party candidates face this vicious cycle that is about resources. Nobody thinks they're going to win, so nobody gives them the kind of resources that they could have in order to win. And when they don't have the resources, it's hard for them to reach out to voters and explain what they're doing and how they're doing it and why they're doing it. And this is a vicious cycle that makes it hard for small party candidates in order to gain the traction that they need in order to get their voice out there. So this bill would extend the program that we are in to all state level candidates. We think this is an essential expansion of the program. Right now, the program also exists in 6 counties and exists at the county level, but we think expanding this program to include state senators, state delegates, and the governor's race helps to broaden democracy for multiple parties, but also for people who don't have access to wealth and power that are running in the 2 dominant parties. Public financing is good. It is the antidote to the problems that we have with money in politics. Citizens United isn't going away anytime soon. And this is a way to have politicians that are more interested in getting small donations from people for which they are accountable to those people than dialing for $6,000 donations at a time. Think about it like this. If your cap is $250 because you're in a public financing race, anybody who can give anywhere up to $250 has the same weight for you as anybody else. In a world where other candidates can raise, non-publicly financed candidates can raise $6,000 at a time in donations, most of those candidates are going to focus on people who can give $6,000 donations at a time. And so this gets folks to focus on people, on individuals, on organizing, and on the kind of tangible goals that you can use in order to build a system that is more equitable. And, look, it doesn't fix the problem. It doesn't fix the problem of money in politics. It doesn't level the playing field, but at least it allows us to be on the same playing field.
Yeah. Yep. So right now it's county executives and county council members in those 6. Okay. So yeah, there's, clear precedent for it. I've been mostly paying attention to I think there's a Baltimore County candidate and a Anne Arundel County candidate for county executive who are using those county-based systems. And some of the caps at the county levels are higher than our cap, right? Is that the case now?
Yeah, so there's some interesting stuff about the cap. $250 is not a very high cap. Montgomery County has a $500 cap per person, and this bill would keep that $250 cap. I think that I don't know if this bill is going to pass this year. I think this bill is in the phase where it's starting, and it's really important to get the conversation started, and the caps are part of the conversation. What I want to say about these 2 bills is that I did not just go to these committees to give my opinion on these 2 bills. right? This is a place where the work that we're doing as part of our effort to expand and make healthier multi-party democracy makes us uniquely qualified, or makes me uniquely qualified to talk about these things. On HB 499, the Ballot Petition Modernization Act, I am the person who worked with Director Demarinis in order to get the emergency COVID regulations named. I was the named plaintiff in a federal lawsuit against the state of Maryland in order to allow this as a part of a settlement in 2000. We have worked with Delegate Ruth for a long time on this question. On the public financing piece, you and I are the only people in the state right now using state level public financing. And it is important for us to be able to go explain to the committee what that process is like. So sometimes some of these testimonies are like, oh, come listen to my opinion. I'm pontificating in front of the committee. Obviously, there's some of that, we're sharing our opinion, but we're sharing our opinion on these things as folks who have direct experience working with them. And I think it's important for committees like this to hear that there are folks from outside the two parties that are doing work with the State Board of Elections, that are taking part of these programs. It is part of expanding and understanding the idea of a multi-party system that we have right now. And, it's important to know how those parties and those candidates, you and I, work within that system.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So testifying from a place of personal lived experience. Our friend on the school board, Ash Esposito, talks a lot about bringing lived experience to her elected position. And here you're bringing lived experience with both of these things to the testimony that you're giving. So what else? There's a couple more bills, right, that you were testifying on.
Yeah, let's get to the other two here. So HB 496 is about open primary elections. This is sponsored by Delegate Lily Chi, and she has been working on this issue for a long time. I was lucky enough to participate in a forward party forum with her staff about this bill, and we support it. What this bill does is it allows people who are unaffiliated voters to vote in a Republican or Democratic primary, and it allows them to do so without having to change their affiliation to that party. It does not allow us as Greens to vote in those primaries, because, and I think that's a good thing. And that was one of the things that I insisted that it do when I was on these workshops with Delegate Chi's staff, because I think there's a balance to be struck right now between the number of people who are unaffiliated voters. Almost 1 million unaffiliated voters. There's soon going to be more unaffiliateds than there are Republicans, and the number is quickly growing. And this is a problem. It is a problem in a state like Maryland, where most of our elections are decided in the primary, and that there is not competitive general elections. It's a policy problem when 1 in 4 people are opting out of that system. When 1 in 4 people are opting out of that system because they're so disgusted with the two parties and they don't feel like affiliating with them. So I think that what is good about this bill is that it strikes a balance between allowing parties to preserve their right to nominate candidates without partisans from other parties getting to vote in their elections, and it allows unaffiliated voters to have a say in what may be the only election that determines the outcome. So, I support this bill. This bill may be a place where we don't agree with some Greens, right? Like, I think there are some Greens who would say, if you're unaffiliated, that's a choice. And I agree that it is a choice, but I think it's a policy problem that needs to be solved. And I also think it's a political problem, because if this problem does not get solved right now, there are well-funded national groups who are attacking the legitimacy of elections based on this exclusion, and they want to replace it with systems that are entirely against parties, that reduce parties to merely brands that can give endorsements. You may have heard of some of these top X systems or nonpartisan primaries or things like that. Those are bad systems, and we need to be cautious about those systems. And if we don't solve this problem of unaffiliated voters being able to vote in primaries, the next step is likely to be those well-funded national conglomerates coming after the primary system as a whole. And I think this is a good compromise in order to avoid that. And this one is the opposite of the other two. And the other two, we have unique experience of something that we get to do and have done. This is a place where we have a unique experience of not getting to do the thing. If the bill passed, we would not be able to vote. We would still not be able to vote in primaries, but we're not celebrating it because it's good for us. We're celebrating it and endorsing it because it's good for voters. And I think that is a thing that is really important to remind folks of here. Our grassroots democracy pushes are about making things better for voters, not making things better for us. Sometimes making things better for small parties makes things better for voters, but the purpose and the focus should be on what's good for voters and what's good on making sure that politicians and elected leaders are responsive to those voters.
Yeah, and just to be clear, you mentioned some Greens might have an issue with it. This applies to the Democratic and Republican primaries, which are funded by the state and run by the State Board of Elections. Because non-principal parties in Maryland have to fund and organize their own and administer their own primaries, it would not allow unaffiliated voters to vote in the Green or Libertarian or working class party primaries. Is that correct?
It does not allow them to. It does not really take a position on that. What I would say, though, is the Green Party has at different times allowed unaffiliated voters to vote in our primary, and it is a decision that we get to make. And I actually think that this bill preserves that, because we may have somebody who is unaffiliated, wants to vote in our primary, and under the current system, if they wanted to vote for their state assembly or for their general assembly person, they would have to change to the Democratic Party in order to be able to vote in that primary. Once they've changed to the Democratic Party, they're unable to vote in our primary, which occurs a couple of weeks later in this year and in this cycle. So in this way, it preserves the ability of unaffiliated to get to vote in our party if we decide to let them vote in our party without forcing them to pass up the chance to vote for two awesome guys who are running on the Green ticket because they want to have a say on who their state senator is.
Right. Okay. So yeah, it's good for voters. It undermines the argument for a bad solution to this problem, and makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, and like I said, it was really useful. I appreciate and I want to commend Delegate Chief for reaching out and having us included in this session, because I believe in that session that we were in, we were the only representatives of a ballot recognized third party. And there was discussion on the call about whether or not it should include, whether it should be designed this way. And we were able to help shape it in a way that kept it designed this way, which is, I think, the right way to shape it.
Mm-hmm.
So,
okay. So, and there's one more, right?
Whew, yeah. It's starting to feel a little bit like yesterday, except we're getting done in an hour and a half here, and yesterday was 6.5 hours. So, it's we're much more efficient than sitting in the committee was yesterday. HB 584 is the Clean Maryland Democracy Amendment, and this is sponsored by Delegate Stewart. We mentioned Delegate Stewart last week as a person that we are working with in order to try to get HB 101, which is our bill about debate access, across the finish line. This bill by Delegate Stewart is a great bill. It takes a lot of the things that we've talked about before: public financing, curtailing money in politics, or curtailing foreign and dark money in politics, and enshrining the right to vote in the Maryland Constitution, and it bundles them into a constitutional amendment. We support all of the key components of this bill, but I think it's important to put it into a constitutional amendment in this case because it has the benefit of getting voters talking about democracy. And the lesson that we learned from question H, which was the Baltimore City Charter Amendment in 2024, which would have cut the city council in half, is that when you get voters talking about democracy, you can sometimes get unprecedented, unexpected outcomes that change the conventional wisdom. So for 20 years in Baltimore and 50 charter amendments before question H, every single charter amendment had passed. Yes, 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 yes. It had become an unspoken truth of Baltimore politics that charter amendments pass all the time. When we looked at Question H, which was funded by David Smith of Sinclair Broadcasting, he wrote up almost a $500,000 check to fund that ballot initiative. We understood that this was the opportunity to break that conventional wisdom. And we knew that in order to do that, we had to get the press involved. We had to build coalitions with labor and faith organizations and advocacy organizations. We had to get politicians involved. And we had to have conversations with our neighbors and with strangers who might be unaffiliated or disenchanted voters. We did that, it won, and it changed the conventional wisdom, and it stopped a bad policy from happening. The reason we support HB 584 is because it brings that same concept to a statewide constitutional amendment on democracy reform. It gives us an opportunity to have conversations at bars and on street corners and on bus stops about democracy and about campaign finance in a way that very little else does. And so we support the constituent parts, but we support bringing it and putting it in front of voters so that voters get to have these conversations, they get to decide, and so that we can talk about democracy with our friends and strangers, because doing that is what builds the muscles of grassroots democracy that are going to allow us to build a better system that can allow Maryland to get out of the two-party trap that it's in.
Hear, hear. Well, I'm a little bit exhausted just listening to all the testifying you did, so I can only imagine how you feel, Andy, having come back from that just a couple, yesterday.
And if you combine this with the stuff that we talked about last week, which is debate access and public broadcasting access for small parties, it starts to create a picture in which Maryland is investing and strengthening the smaller parties that exist within its multi-party system, that is making it healthier. And when we have healthy small parties, even if they don't win, it's good for voters. It increases general election turnout. It gives people who are dissatisfied with the parties that exist right now options about who to vote for. It creates leverage for communities and voters that are left out of the current system. It creates competition. It creates accountability. And it creates responsiveness to voters. So when we talk about this, it's not just because we want money, we want votes. We do want those things. Because we think that our multi-party system, where a quarter of the people are dropping out of it, is better served when we have more options for people to see themselves in. And when they can see themselves in those options and vote for them, we can get better outcomes for the communities and the people that we all care about.
Mm-hmm. And we also we've talked about this in the past, and we can talk about it in the future, but we were doing some work around making constitutional conventions easier to call, and that's another way to empower people through a more direct form of democracy.
Certainly. Yeah, we'll talk about that soon. That bill is sponsored, and it is bipartisan. It is Republican Delegate Hornberger and Democrat Delegate Von Stewart, whose name keeps coming up. And so that bill has been introduced, and we're going to be probably putting together an op-ed about it this weekend. In 2030, there will be a constitutional convention, and we want the voters to have the best shot possible at passing it. More details to come on that, but I think it's an important piece of legislation, and I'm glad to see that it has tripartisan support, really. Yeah. Multi-partisan support, right? And that is part of the reason that we're hanging out in this committee, is because we think that we don't have to give up just because we're not in power. That doesn't mean we have to give up on trying to influence the kind of legislation that we need in order to move Maryland to a place with more and healthier parties, so that voters are more likely to see themselves on the ballot.
Mm-hmm.